Bien, bienvenidos a la sesión del workshop de hoy bajo el marco.
Welcome to today's session within the Regional Public Goods and LACPASS. We will begin with today's session, and on the screen you can see what has been the roadmap that we have for contents and associated to the LACPASS workshops for this area in relation to the IPS and MHD. Today, we are in the third workshop of the slide, the one that has to do with IPS transformations. And the idea today is, and what we were saying in last Friday's technical committee, is to put emphasis on the vaccination certificate in terms of the DDCC profile of the WHO, but also taking into account the immunization data that is in the IPS. Let's remember that our technical route defines it like this. We have strongly worked with IPS in the recent weeks, all of the tools that have been made available, and also LACPASS aim at all of the countries to be doing this IPS, and that we will build this up and advance in this pyramid. For the time being, and some information associated to what's coming after this workshop, we will evaluate how much we managed to cover in today's session, and if necessary, we might reinforce it or extend it, and we might have a second part from this transformations and DDCC part, maybe more focus on the COVID or vaccination certification itself, because the idea is to check in detail what are the subsets and how we can add on other vaccines apart from COVID that we want to test out in the connectathon of the end of the year. This is as a brief introduction, so I'm interested that after we define this last workshop and to see if we have the need or not to extend it based on how we advance today and how you are also available to generate the certificate as the DDCC certificate from the IPS. We will also start addressing the LAC chain and all the workshops that they will present in terms of the cryptographic and other tools that we are making available in the region that seek to make available and have these vaccination electronic signatures. So we expect to have more news and dates for you very soon. We will be sharing all of this information with you as we plan all of these activities with the LACPASS. And now I give the floor to Sergio Peñafiel. Here I give the floor to you for today's session. Thank you, Carlos, for the introduction. So today's workshop will address the DDCC IPS transformation, and as we have been doing in recent workshops, and to transfer the IPS into a DDCC, we need to know what requirements the IPS needs to have for this to happen. There's a few requirements, and then we will show you the service that we have available in order to do this transformation. The idea is that at the end of the session, we will do a test. Hopefully you can also test it. So I ask you if you can start preparing your servers for those of you that might be able to do the test with us jointly. The first compose was updated into a new version. So we ask that you have the latest version for the tests that we will carry out today. So firstly, I would like to explain how this transformations from IPS to DDDC works. As we have seen, an IPS document can contain much information from this patient summary, and there's also vaccination information from that patient, and also data from the organizations that are the data that you need afterwards in the DDCC to build the certificate. So it is possible, and all of the information in the IPS could be transformed into a DDCC. So under the conditions that I will show you later on, we have a FIRE operation called a $DDCC that works with the bundles of IPS. And what it does is that it does this transformation in an automatic fashion. So you call on the operation, and with the bundle IPS identifier, it gives you the DDCC signed and everything if you comply with all of the requirements. What this service does is this, what appears in this diagram here. Currently, between of all of the services that we have three that are in blue that we gave you and that you have already raised. One is the IPS mediator that is used for the transaction, for example, the images 65, where we had been doing it just for that. But for now, the IPS mediator is also doing this transformation. We have the Fire server that you already know, the Happy Fire, that comes with a Docker Compose, and this other service, which I don't know if you remember, that is the DDCC mediator. You can give an object for this, and it gives you back the DDCC certificate duly signed. So the IPS mediator does all the work of doing the transformation. So the first thing that it does is call on the Fire server to have the bundle IPS. And then when it calls it internally inside the Docker network, and when it gets the IPS here, it validates that the relevant fields that you need to build the DDCC exist. And if they exist, what it does is that builds this DDCC questionnaire response that it's basically the fields that are needed in DDCC. And this is provided or given to the DDCC mediator. As an input, also, this service is done automatically. And for this service, it's like you did any other query or request from a questionnaire response, and then it gives you back the signed DDCC certificate. And this is the service. And now if you see, it's a slightly different from a more normal transformation that you could expect, just like going from an IPS to a DDCC with a structure map or so. But we did it this way using the DDCC mediator because we have there the creation, for example, the QR code or the signature that in another way we would have to replicate in another service that would not make much sense. So what we did is to use the service more than implement it once again. And this is what happens behind the scenes in the transformation. As I said before, there's a couple of requirements for an IPS to be able to work with this transformation. If you try any IPS that you have, probably it will not work because it has to comply with these requirements. First is that, well, it's an IPS requirement, is that there has to be a patient resource where you have an identifier, name, birth date, and gender. And those is the data needed. But what's important here is that DDCC will take on the first patient's identifier in the certificate. So there you have to decide what is the primary patient's identifier. That should be, if you're thinking about using this for a national scope. It should be maybe the national identifier. And that is an important point. And that is the first thing that goes into the certificate. Secondly, the IPS, what IPS has to have is an organization resource that will be the organization that authorizes the issuance of the certificate, like the Ministry of Health or the equivalent that you have in your countries. This has to have an identifier and a name. But obviously, if you can build it more completely, that would be better. And what's more important is that the APS has to have an immunization resource, and not only an immunization resource or any immunization resource, like those that appear in the IPS documentation and the one that we've seen so far. It has to comply with a specific profile, which is this DDCC immunization. That profile is defined in the IPS DDCC implementation guide, and it's an extension from the immunization resource, and all of the immunization fields are there, but it adds some fields that immunization alone doesn't have. And as a minimum, you need these fields that appear here, like the vaccine code, the brand of the vaccination. They are coded, as we will see further on, the batch of the vaccine, which is print, the country of immunization, date of immunization, and the amount of doses applied. So in the latest version that we uploaded from the repository, we added a new IPS example that we will show you. So here, if you go to repository, you will see a new IPS sample that contains the minimum requirements that you need for the transformation IPS DDCC to work. So you can, this is what you need to do with the data that you use. So here, we can go and check this one out. I have also in the JSON editor here. If you see, this is an IPS like all of the IPSs. It's a bundle type document that has a resource, which is a composition, and we have eliminated on purpose various sections of the IPS, and we just left the composition, patient, immunization, and organization. If you realize this is a very short IPS, it doesn't have any allergies or conditions that are the other parts that are required in the IPS, but we omitted them here for this example. And so as always, you have composition, and as I said before, you will just find immunization that appears a reference below. Then the patient is the same one as before. It has an identifier, which is this one. And it has, well, actually has two identifiers, but this one will be the one that will be transferred into the certificate. And it has name, as I said before, gender, and birth date. We could have more data like contact details, address, and other things, but this is the minimum requirement. Then you have the immunization resource, which is important because this is the one that is more, it is handled differently as we had done before. Immunization has to comply with this profile. As you see, there is an attribute called meta profile that tells us that this resource must meet certain requirements, and it says that it actually complies with this requirement, which is immunization. And if you go to look, this is the implementation guide of DDCC, the official one. And within the artifacts that they have and what they share is that there is we have this profile, which is called DDC immunization, which is a profile on immunizations that gives us the information that these type of resources have. If you remember, is the same as immunization because it has the attributes like vaccine code, batch number, but it also adds what's missing. And this is added as extensions to the resource. For example, it adds the brand of the vaccine, the country where the immunization took place, and also they add the amount of doses to the protocol applied. So this is the guide, the reference guide of how this profile is used, and we can see this in the resource itself. In the immunization resource, if you can appreciate here, we have the first part, which is the information that comes directly from immunization, like lot number, the date when it happened, the vaccination code. And this is important because the vaccine code, sorry, is a coding concept as FIRE states it, and that indicate a system and the code. So normally what we have been doing so far is using these codes for all, but the DDCC indicates that the vaccination codes have to be C11. So here it's necessary to change the system and say that it will be a C11 code and put the specific code of the vaccine. In this case, it has this name. How can you know these codes? Well, these are here in the implementation guide that I showed you before. For example, in vaccine code that we were just checking now, you can go to the value set of vaccines, and these are all the vaccines with all the codes and what they mean. You can check out the information here, or you can check it directly if you have this already set in. This is very important because this is a change in relation to what we have been doing before. Apart from that, we have the information, the patient information. This could be more, and all of the other extras that I said are here in the extension part. So in extension, we have 3 objects, and the extensions are according to how these values are defined. An extension, there's always a URL and a value coding. The URL tells us that what we are indicating, and the value is actually what values they are. We'll have 2 extensions then. One for the vaccine brands, which has its own coding system. So if you go here, if I go to this one directly, you can see the same, basically the values, that each of these brands take. Maybe the system, I have to check this. But that's the idea. These are values that come from a specification as the one we just saw now, where you have to change in this part, like a trade-off event. This is from 2 to 20. So immunization has to be done with this formula. It has to have this profile, the extensions, at least these three, the code of the C11 vaccination, the lot number, the date, and the amount of doses. If you do this in immunization, the transformation will work correctly. And you also need an organization type of resource that has an identifier, a name. And here in the composition, it complies with the custodian role. So this is the minimum IPS. And as I said before, you can use this to test out the transformation, and it's available. I suggest that you take on this one to test it at the beginning, and then try to build the resource from your own information systems or the database that you are using in order to yes. So once we have the IPS with the structure, what follows is to do the transformation itself. And as I had mentioned before, we have this operation with a dollar DDCC that works on a bundle. As you see, I'm calling on a fire service and we have a bundle with a certain ID. And at the end, I want to tell them that I want to do an operation on this resource, which is the one we just implemented. And when you execute this, what it will do is that to go look for the IPS, transform it, and then fill in the fields and give you a result. And it will give you the object that corresponds to the DDCC service. That where here basically is the certificate as a bundle, document type bundle. So to see that, and also that you can test this out, we have a collection in Postman that we had given to you in the previous workshop on transformations. And in this Postman collection, we add a new call that is called DDCC transformation, a new get. And here it gives you an example. You do a get to the mediator, as I said before, with this fire bundle structure with an ID. This is the ID of the bundle that I had just shown you. And then you put dollar $DDCC. And if I execute this, what will happen is that this process does everything that I showed you before, and it gives you back the DDCC. This is a batch response, but inside you have a type 2 bundle, as you can see way down here. It has the structure of the DDCC. You have all of the information of the DDCC dataset. And these are the ones that were said where you have the identifier, my name, then the code that I had put in there, the vaccination code, the place or location, and everything is transferred correctly, the batch or lot number. That's the way you will see it. And this document, if you remember well, apart from giving you an attachment, which is the QR code or a PDF on a JSON also of the information. The most important one to see, maybe it's a QR code. As you can see, there's an attachment of an image. And in this data, we have the QR code 64. I can copy all of this.
Ya. Entonces, por ejemplo, acá hay una página que pasa
Here,
de
there's a page which is base 64. It is transformed into an image, and it gives me here the QR code associated to the DDCC certificate. So this code is already signed because when you upload the DDCC service, you have to use your own key and it has the correct DDCC structure. And that's how you can find it. And that's how we close the loop. So we begin with this IPS that we knew, and we end with this QR code of the DDCC certificate. Then the idea is that you test this, as I said before, and to do that, the same as before, we have a file of a shared Excel spreadsheet that is the same one as the previous workshop where we put the patient identifiers. Now there's another tab down here which is called DDCC, and the idea is that in the end you upload the QR codes that you generate after all of this process. And this will be useful as a repository later on to test the validation of these codes. That's the idea. So if somebody wants to, maybe you can change this IPS and change the data, just play around. If you haven't implemented the latest version of the Docker Compose yet, you can use the services that are available, that we have available in LACPASS. You can use them without a problem, which are the same ones that appear in the Postman collection in the environment here. So the idea is that you test this and that you can implement this later in your infrastructure. Fernando here asked a question in the chat. Yes, the DDCC operation, as I showed before, what it does is go through the question and response. It takes the IPS here and it builds the question and response and it sends it to the DDCC that finally generates the signed certificate. And all of this is done automatically when we go to the get DDCC. One question. The final DDCC is in the signature in the organization and in the attachment. Is the signature there also in the attachment? Yes, the QR is duly signed. Yes, because one of the requirements to upload the service and of the DCC is to add the here in the set data where you have to put your private key, and that is what is used to sign the certificates. So you have the format and yes, it goes to the base 45. Thank you. The questionnaire response is not saved. It is only built in the memory to call on a service. I don't know if there's any question and if somebody wants to test this, which would be ideal. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention, and that Carlos mentioned at the beginning, that if we go back to the DDCC immunization, there are various value sets that are still referenced only for COVID. And so far, we're following the standard directly. So if you want to go to other vaccines, we would have to do some kind of adaptation that has not been done yet. So the service works basically just for COVID right now, for COVID vaccinations. So you would just have to change the codes? Yes, you would have to create new value sets and then change the codes. The process would be exactly the same because the structure is the same. What changes is just the coding. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else has a question or maybe is testing right now and has a question. This Excel is shared, answering your question, Miguel's question. There, I just shared it once again. It's the second tab or page of this Excel spreadsheet. Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. My doubt is in relation to the CLM codes. Those, when I set up my IPS and I request the steps for the service that will generate the DCC, they have to be well built, right? So is there anything that will tell me that maybe the code is not the correct one and it will give me an error? How do I know? How do you manage the roles if I don't give the right codes? That's one question. And also in the exercise there, we just see this for COVID, but the idea is that we should generate the certificate for any scheme, any vaccine. So all of the biologicals should go in that C11, right? I don't know if I was clear in my questions. Yes. Yes, in relation to the first question, Alejandro, maybe you can help me out, but I understand that the DDCC service does check that. Yes, yes, Sergio. In relation to the operation of the DDCC, yes, that's the link between the IPS and the DDCC. In relation to the edited software or the engine or the mediator of DDCC, initially it is made for DDCC, which is basically COVID type certificates. But the internal mechanics of this process will make it eventually possible to be used with any vaccine. Currently, if we just take a look at the profiles, we know that everything just references COVID, and that is part of the work that is still pending to do to be able to create these new value sets and to be able to extend this to other vaccines. The library or the software itself that is being used currently is not directly validating this due to some technical issues. We did not want to make this type of validations mandatory, and but eventually having a clear understanding of that and being able to do an update of the process, we could include that validation as to be like mandatory. I would like to complement what just Alejandro said. We are assessing is if that for Conectaton, we might do semantic validation of the C11 code for vaccines that we want to use in those that we want to test. Don't forget that we have a terminological service, and that at the very beginning it was to do the mapping from the SNOMED APS to C11, and we realized that we don't have a one-to-one equivalence, because that one is much more summarized. There's less terms. Something can be mapped, but the added value is not that much for what we want to use. But maybe at another later stage, we can change the terminological services in order to extend this and to have a semantic validation for that. This is under assessment, and we would like, maybe we will know how much we can do in that semantic validation. If we don't manage to have it ready for Conectaton, we still want to mature this and leave this ready post Conectaton to do these type of validations, understanding that the DDCC validation is still under assessment, and eventually it will be extended to other vaccines, but it was built basically just for COVID. So we need to know if the validators that we currently have available for Conectaton, the ones that are in the MHD, allow us to have a certain flexibility to do those semantic validations afterwards. It will depend on what the WHO will tell us and how much we can work with the MHD and with the tools, so we can get these semantic validations. In the worst case scenario, we can work maybe with specific concepts, and maybe we can make them available for Conectaton. And in relation, the second question, maybe you can explain it better, or maybe Sergio, Alejandro, you understood? I think what I just said just answers the first question. No, you really answered the first question. The first was the validation of the C11 codes, and if it only had scope for COVID or other vaccines. So you answered both. Yes, the definition as we have it today, and if we go to the formal definition of the WHO, is just for COVID, but this structure will be extended as for to other vaccines, especially for this initiative of having a reliability framework. We are part of the process. So in the Conectaton, the WHO will be there. They are coming to see what are the crazy things we're doing here with the DDCC and how we can maybe incorporate the other vaccines, and everything we're doing here is for supporting that definition. But obviously, we need to see if there's flexibility in relation to what is defined and what we are contributing. But that's it. The intention, obviously, is to use like yellow fever, in some concepts of C11, maybe polio, and we will see what we can implement. The idea is that they become available so we can do the tests in the Conectaton with other vaccines more than just COVID. So do you have any expectation of the scope for the rest of the biologicals in time, or really you don't know yet? Eventually, once again, it will be depend on the definition of the WHO and within the roadmap that they gave us. And the formal kickoff is with COVID, but I haven't seen any dates where they have stated anything for the remaining vaccines in terms of deadlines or dates or when they plan to incorporate this. We just know that yes, the intention is to use the DDCC framework and do it extended to the other vaccines. And at the beginning, you could think that it's all of those available in the C11, because that's what is defined within the standard itself. But in terms of dates or when this will be more formal from the WHO, at least we don't have that information. I would like to add, Carlos, that in this case, well, the process has been defined and it has been done before. And what you just have to do is just basically add the new code, change the profile saying that it doesn't cover only COVID, but it will cover other diseases. And there should be an update of the implementation guide, obviously. And after that update, all of the libraries should be updated accordingly to comply with that specifications. It's little steps, but at least it's slowly but surely. In that line, if we could see once again, the basis of the immunizations of what FIRE has, if you can show that resource again, please, because it would allow to have any biologicals there. For obviously, maybe today we have the COVID codes, but maybe we could put the other codes in to see what is the basis of the immunization. And it has been profiled, in this case, the DDCC. And if you can please check, what are the fields? Or which of these fields, maybe we could model any biologicals here.
Sí, aquí está. En realidad, habría que cambiar ciertas cosas.
We would have to change a few things, but for example, in the vaccination code, it says that it should be this value set, which are all associated to COVID. This is what we have to change. It's not the structure itself, because it will, in JSON, it will still be vaccine code, but we have to change these value sets where you go and look for the information. There's another one here, which is just for COVID, and which is the target. And here we would have to add the other ones that you manage. But in general, that resource allows, as FIRE promised, maybe for 30% for any other biological, like patient, location, the brand, doses. I think it's around there somewhere. The number of doses. So maybe if we could use this resource for other vaccines. And if you agree, the people who are here, if they agree, if we could maybe do another session where we all try to do this, because I think we just have 10 minutes left, because some of us have had a few difficulties to do this now. So maybe we can try to maybe register what are the problems. And as Carlos says, maybe next week, each one of us can show our QR codes. If we do this, it should generate the code, right? Yes. As I showed here, in the base 64, yes, but that's where you get the QR code. So if we could do that, maybe exchange QR codes, or maybe show the problems that we might encounter doing this, that would be great.
Sí, a mí me parece buena idea.
O no sé si alguien ya.
Yes, I think it's a good idea. Or maybe somebody else has done it already. See, I think Miguel is testing, but I don't know if we'll have time to see the results. But I think that the proposal of extending the session just focused on tests, I think it's a great idea. This material will be uploaded into the LACPASS website, so you can consult it immediately. I think we're running out of technical committee dates. I think this Friday, July 7th, we don't have a technical committee. I think it's on the 14th. And from there on, it's every 15 days, unless something happens, we can accommodate the dates. But so the idea would be to make the most of that space just for tests. Maybe it could be another session, could be at the same time, but that week, more or less. So we can advance next week in updating the repository. Whoever has not updated the Docker, that they do it so we can check this material, generate, and finish with IPS, upload it in the server if you have a public one. And then maybe after that, we could do a one-on-one check of doing this exercise. I don't know what you think, Fernando, Sergio, Alejandro. It's just a proposal.
Sí, a mí me parece bien.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Yes. So we can have a week for supporting people if they have any doubts, and we can test it at the subsequent week, the week after that. Yes, I think it's key that we all try to do this exercise that Sergio just showed us. Okay, so in principle, the next technical committee will be used for status and to carry out or just review the exercise. It will be in 2 more Fridays, and next week, the countries will just work internally. All of this material will be available, as always, in the relevant channels and in Raxel and in the YouTube of Raxel LACPASS YouTube channel. We still have a few minutes. If anyone has a specific question. I think someone already did this successfully.
Lucía, me dicen por interno que tuvo éxito.
Lucia, by the way, it seems like she did this successfully. Lucia, maybe you can share? Okay, she shared the QR code in the chat. Lucia, would you like to show us this on screen? Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, Lucia, now you can share your screen.
Lucía.
¿Se escucha?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, I use this platform, LACPASS platform. I modified the patient data. I did the I modified the patient information, the name, the ID, cancel post, then mediator, create all the resources, composition, the patient, immunization, organization, and here with this bundle that was created, it gives you a bundle of the transaction. And here with the bundle document, this one, and I did get DDCC transformation and then dollar DDCC, and then I obtained, I think it's this PDF. This is the one that I copied. In this, I pasted this in this page and I generated the QR code.
Buenísimo, Lucía. Muchas gracias.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucia.
Súper
Very,
bien.
very well done.
Alejandro, ahí, bueno, eso lo estamos filmando con las PKI que están en los repositorios locales de cada país, ¿no?
Were you saying the
Sí, están
repositories
filmados,
from
sí,
each
están en un
country?
servidor de prueba de
Yeah, if they're
el
using the
código
LACPASS test
es la llave
server, it's the
transversal
key, it's a
de
private key
la
that we
reunión
have.
propia de este
But in their
de la
infrastructure,
DDCC.
they have to put
ahí
their
lo vamos a incorporar de
a
forma
private
general.
key. That's where we put the LAC chain later on, right?
Utilizar las herramientas de LACPASS también para firmar esos codes,
Yes,
lo que viene.
that's what's
Bueno,
coming.
estamos sobre el tiempo. Muchas gracias
So
nuevamente
we're right on time. Thank you, Lucia, that
a todos. La idea es que
you showed us what you did. So next week, the idea is that you generate your certificates as of DDCC. If you have doubts, use Slack, and we will use in the next technical committee, we will check all of this out, and we will check one by one so each of the countries can show us the progress from their own notes or the problems that you might encounter and face. You know that synergies between groups is quite good. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sergio, Alejandro, Fernando. I hope you have a good weekend, and we will be communicating very soon.
Muchas gracias a todos. Buenas tardes.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Gracias, buenas tardes.